The aroma of stale coffee, sizzling bacon, and maple syrup hung thick in the air of Pop's Diner, a local institution where the chipped formica tables and worn red vinyl booths held decades of whispered secrets and shouted orders. It was the kind of place where the waitresses knew your usual and the morning regulars, discussed everything from local politics to the unpredictable weather. Arthur Finch was one such regular. Every Tuesday and Thursday, precisely at 7:15 a.m., he'd occupy the booth by the window, nursing a cup of black coffee and a plate of scrambled eggs. Arthur was a man of quiet habits and even quieter demeanor. His presence, though consistent, was often overlooked, a testament to his unassuming nature. Yet he carried a weight that was impossible to ignore once you truly saw him. His right leg, from just above the knee, was a prosthetic, a sleek, modern piece of titanium and carbon fiber that clicked softly with each deliberate step. His left arm, though present, hung slightly stiffly, a testament to nerve damage that had left it mostly unresponsive. His face, kind and weathered, bore the faint, almost invisible scars of shrapnel. And his eyes, a faded blue, often held a distant, contemplative look, as if he were still scanning horizons far beyond Pop's Diner. He was a veteran, though he never spoke of it, and the subtle limp and the careful way he maneuvered his coffee cup were the only clues to his past. This particular Tuesday, theusualmorning.com was shattered by the arrival of a group of 4 young men, boisterous and loud, their laughter echoing a little too harshly in the cozy space. They were in their early 20s, dressed in ill-fitting tracksuits and baseball caps, worn backward, radiating an air of unearned confidence. They slid into a booth a few tables away from Arthur, their voices immediately dominating the diner's gentle hum. "Yo, check it out. Benny," one of them, a bulky fellow with a neck tattoo, sneered, nudging his friend, probably still trying to figure out how to use a fork. Arthur, lost in his thoughts, didn't react. He simply took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze fixed on the condensation forming on the windowpane. He'd learned long ago that engaging with such casual cruelty only fueled it. "Nah, man, that's not Jenkins." Another one chimed in, louder this time. "That's Captain Ahab over there, missing a leg, probably lost it fighting a whale, or maybe just falling off his porch." Laughter, sharp and derisive, followed. Arthur's hand, holding his coffee cup, trembled almost. He felt the familiar flush of heat creep up his neck, the knot of anger tightening in his stomach. He focused on the warmth of the ceramic against his palm, trying to push the words away, to make them dissolve into the background noise. He was a master of compartmentalization, a skill honed in places where ignoring the unbearable was a matter of survival. The waitress, a harried woman named Brenda, approached their table, her smile strained. "Can I get you boys anything?" "Yeah, Brenda, how about some quiet?" The necktattooed one, who seemed to be the ringleader, "This place is a little too crippled for my taste this morning." He punctuated the word with a pointed glance at Arthur. Brenda's face tightened, but she said nothing, merely jotting down their order with a shaky hand. She'd seen Arthur's quiet dignity, the way he never complained, even when his prosthetic legs sometimes rubbed him raw. She knew he deserved better. Other patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A middle-aged couple at the counter exchanged worried glances. A lone businessman, engrossed in his newspaper, subtly lowered it, his eyes darting towards the commotion. No one spoke up. The unspoken rule in Pops, as in many public spaces, was to avoid confrontation, to pretend not to notice, to hope it would simply fade away. But the bullies, emboldened by the silence, pressed on. "Hey, old man," the ringleader called out, his voice carrying clearly across the diner. "You deaf too? Or just too slow to turn around?" Arthur slowly, deliberately, turned his head. His faded blue eyes, though weary, met the sneering gaze of the young man. There was no anger in them, only a profound sadness. A weariness that spoke of battles fought and sacrifices made, none of which this young man could ever comprehend. "Something I can help you with, son?" Arthur asked, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly calm. The ringleader snorted. "Yeah, you can help us by not stinking up the place with your brokenness. This is a diner, not a hospital ward." His friends guffawed, slapping the table. One of them, a skinny kid with a wispy mustache, mimicked Arthur's limp, dragging his leg exaggeratedly as he walked a few steps towards the counter. Arthur's jaw tightened. He clenched his good hand into a fist under the table, his knuckles white. The memories, usually kept at bay, began to surface. The searing pain, the dust and blood, the faces of his comrades. He took a deep, shaky breath, fighting for control. He was a Marine. He had faced down far worse than these pathetic excuses for men. But the helplessness, the inability to simply walk away without feeling the sting of their words, was a different kind of pain. Brendu, bringing their drinks, slammed them down with a little more force than necessary. "That's enough, boys," she muttered, her voice low but firm. "You want to eat? Eat. Otherwise, take your business elsewhere." The ringleader glared at her. "Mind your own business, sweetheart. We're just having a little fun." He then turned back to Arthur. "What did you do, old man? Fall off a bar stool? Or did you get too close to a firecracker? The laughter grew louder, more cruel. The businessman at the counter cleared his throat loudly, a futile attempt to signal his disapproval. The middle-aged couple whispered frantically. Still, no one intervened. The silence of the other patrons, born of discomfort and fear, was a heavy shroud, making Arthur feel even more isolated. Just then, the diner door opened, and a new patron entered. He was a man in his late 40s or early 50s, impeccably dressed in a dark suit that seemed to fit him like a second skin. His posture was ramrod straight, his shoulders broad, his movements precise and economical. His short sultan pepper hair was neatly cropped, and his eyes, though calm, held an intensity that suggested a lifetime of making difficult decisions. He carried himself with an air of quiet authority, the kind that didn't need to be announced. He was a Marine colonel, though only a discerning eye would recognize the subtle cut of his suit, the way he held himself, the almost imperceptible hint of a military bearing that civilian clothes could not entirely conceal. The colonel surveyed the diner, his gaze sweeping over the scene. He noticed the tension, the loud group of young men, the distressed waitress, and finally, Arthur, sitting stoically, his face pale but resolute. He took in the prosthetic leg, the stiff arm, the quiet dignity of the old man enduring the barrage of insults. He walked to the counter, took a seat, and ordered a black coffee from Brenda, his voice a low, steady baritone. He didn't look at the bullies directly, but his presence, like a shift in atmospheric pressure, was subtly felt. The bullies, momentarily distracted by the new arrival, lowered their voices slightly, but their taunts didn't cease. "Look at him, trying to act all tough," the skinny one sneered, pointing a finger at Arthur. "Probably just a desk jockey who got hit by a truck." The ringleader, emboldened by the lack of direct challenge, stood up and walked over to Arthur's table. He leaned in, his face close to Arthur's, his breath smelling of stale cigarettes. "What's the matter, Grandpa? Can't you hear me?" I said. "What did you do to get all messed up? Or are you too ashamed to admit you were just a coward?" This was too far. The line had been crossed. Arthur's face flushed crimson. His eyes, usually distant, now burned with a raw, unprotected pain. He tried to push himself up, a futile gesture with his limited mobility, a flicker of true anger, finally breaking through his stoicism. "Hey," Brenda finally snapped, her voice cracking. "Get away from him now." The ringleader ignored her, his eyes fixed on Arthur, enjoying the veteran's visible distress. He reached out, his hand hovering over Arthur's coffee cup, a clear intent to knock it over. At that precise moment, the Marine colonel, who had been sitting at the counter, slowly, deliberately, pushed himself up from his stool. He didn't speak a word. He didn't make a sound beyond the soft scrape of the stool on the linoleum. Every eye in the diner, including those of the bullies, snapped to him. His movements were fluid, powerful, yet utterly controlled. He wasn't rushing, wasn't threatening, he simply stood, his full height revealed, his posture radiating an almost palpable aura of authority. He began to walk, not quickly, not aggressively, but with a measured, unhurried pace that seemed to stretch the very fabric of time. His gaze was fixed, not on the bullies, but on a point just beyond them, as if they were merely an inconvenient obstacle in his path. His eyes, dark and unblinking, held no anger, no judgment, only an unwavering resolve that was far more terrifying than any shouted threat. The ringleader, his hand still hovering over Arthur's coffee, felt an inexplicable chill run down his spine. His bravado, so loud moments before, began to deflate like a punctured balloon. He looked at the colonel, then back at his friends, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The colonel continued his silent approach. He passed the middle-aged couple, who watched him with wide, awestruck eyes. He passed the businessman, who had now completely abandoned his newspaper, his mouth slightly agape. He passed Brenda, who stood frozen, a silent prayer on her lips. He stopped directly in front of the bully's table, not a foot away from the ringleader. He still hadn't said a word. He simply stood there, his presence alone, a force of nature. His gaze, still fixed on that distant point, seemed to pierce through them, to strip away their arrogance, and reveal the pathetic insecurity beneath. The ringleader, who had been so loud, so confident, now found his voice, caught in his throat. He tried to speak, but only a strangled sound emerged. His eyes darted nervously between the colonel's impassive face and his own friends, who were now shrinking back into their seats, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. The skinny one, who had mimicked Arthur, was now staring at his shoes, his face pale. The colonel slowly, almost imperceptibly, shifted his weight. It was a small movement, but it conveyed immense power, like a predator subtly adjusting its stance before a strike. The air grew thick with unspoken menace. The ringleader swallowed hard. He looked at the colonel's eyes again, and in that silent, unwavering gaze, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Not anger, but a deep, dangerous disappointment. He saw a man who had faced true evil, who had seen true courage, and who now looked upon their petty cruelty with a silent, contemptuous disgust. "All right, "All right," the ringleader blurted out, his voice high-pitched and shaky. "We get it. We're going." He practically stumbled backward, bumping into his friends. "Let's go, guys, now." Without another word, the four young men scrambled out of the booth, their earlier swagger completely gone, replaced by a desperate urge to escape. They practically ran for the door, their faces red with shame and a lingering fear. The diner fell into a profound, almost reverent silence as the door swung shut behind them, the bell above it jingling a final, mocking farewell. The colonel remained standing for a moment, his gaze still fixed on the now empty booth. Then, slowly, he turned his head, his eyes, no longer distant, settled on Arthur. He walked over to Arthur's table. Arthur, who had watched the entire silent confrontation with a mixture of awe and bewilderment, now looked up at the colonel. The colonel reached out, not to shake Arthur's hand, but to gently, respectfully, adjust the slight tilt of Arthur's coffee cup, which had been jostled during the commotion. His touch was light, almost imperceptible. Then, without a word, the colonel raised his right hand to his brow. His salute was crisp, perfect, a silent, profound gesture of respect and camaraderie. It was a salute that spoke volumes, of shared sacrifice, of battles fought, of an unbreakable bond between warriors, regardless of rank or circumstance. Arthur, his eyes glistening, slowly, with his good hand, returned a salute, a little less crisp, a little less perfect, but no less heartfelt. It was a moment suspended in time, a silent acknowledgement between two men who understood the language of service, of duty, of the quiet courage that defined them. The colonel held the salute for a long moment, then slowly lowered his hand. He offered Arthur a faint, almost imperceptible nod, a silent message of respect and understanding. Then, he turned and walked back to the counter, resuming his seat as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Brenda, tears in her eyes, silently refilled his coffee. Arthur Finch had enlisted in the Marine Corps straight out of high school. A skinny kid from a small town with a fierce desire to serve, he found his purpose in the infantry, a natural leader with an uncanny ability to stay calm under pressure. His tour in Afghanistan had been brutal. He was a squad leader, leading his men through unforgiving terrain, facing an enemy that was often unseen. The ambush came on a sweltering August afternoon. An IED buried beneath a dusty road, detonated with a thunderous roar. Arthur had thrown himself over a young private, shielding him from the blast. He remembered the searing heat, the sound of tearing metal and screaming, and then, nothing but darkness. He woke up in a field hospital, the pain a white-hot agony. The doctors told him he was lucky to be alive. He had lost his leg, his arm was severely damaged, and shrapnel had peppered his face. The private he had shielded had walked away with only minor injuries. Arthur had saved a life, but his own had been irrevocably altered. He spent years in rehabilitation, learning to walk, to adapt, to live with the ghosts of the past. He never regretted his service, never regretted his sacrifice, but the world he found was not always kind to those who bore the visible scars of its battles. The casual disrespect, the thoughtless cruelty, often stung more than any physical pain. The colonel, whose name was David Armstrong, had seen it all. He had commanded platoons, companies, and battalions. He had led men into the crucible of combat and brought them home or buried them with honors. He knew the cost of freedom, the sacrifices made in the shadows. He had seen the quiet dignity of men like Arthur Finch, men who carried the weight of their service with stoic grace, never asking for pity, only respect. When he saw those young men, mocking a veteran's wounds, he didn't need words. His uniform, though unseen, was his voice. His bearing, honed by decades of command, was his message. He knew that some lessons were best taught, not with a shout, but with a silent, unyielding presence. The diner slowly returned to its usual hum, but something had fundamentally shifted. The air felt lighter, cleaner. The other patrons, emboldened by the colonel's silent defiance, now looked at Arthur with a newfound respect, a quiet admiration. Brenda brought Arthur a fresh cup of coffee, her hand steady, her smile genuine. Arthur, for the first time in a long time, felt a profound sense of peace. The colonel's silent intervention had been more powerful than any shouted defense, any fiery speech. It was a reminder that he was not alone, that there were still those who understood, who honored, who saw beyond the visible scars to the unwavering spirit beneath. He took a slow sip of his coffee, the warmth spreading through him. The eggs tasted better, the coffee richer. In the quiet dignity of Pop's Diner, on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday, a powerful lesson had been taught. Not with words, but with the silent, unwavering strength of a Marine.